More now on President Obama's news conference at the White House this morning, and Republicans pouncing on his comments that the private sector is, quote, doing fine. The president once again took aim at Republicans, saying an additional 1 million jobs would have been created if Congress had passed the economic plan he offered last year.
And there's no excuse for not passing these ideas. We know they can work. Now, if Congress decides, despite all that they aren't going to do anything about this simply because it's an election year, then they should explain to the American people why.
And joining me now, our News Nation political panel today, Washington Post Deputy National Political Editor Ann Kornbluth and Democratic strategist Richard Fowler. Thank you both for joining us. And let me play the hot moment here that has drawn this back and forth between the president and Governor Romney on the economy. Let me play what the president said in the news conference today on private sector and Romney's response.
We've created 4.3 million jobs over the last 27 months. Over 800,000 just this year alone. The private sector is doing fine.
For the President of the United States to stand up and say the private sector is doing fine is going to go down in history. It's an extraordinary miscalculation and misunderstanding by a president who's out of touch.
Even Chris Matthews today, Ann, was critical of the president's remark on the private sector is doing fine.
Yeah, I would say hold on to your hats. There's going to be a pretty robust discussion about which thing is true and whether, in fact, both things might be true. There obviously has been some job creation. It's not the kind of job creation that normally the White House says it wants. And this is where I think what Obama said is a little bit surprising. Usually every Friday or when there are jobs reports or numbers that get revised upward or downward from the previous month, the White House is careful to say, even on the best days, this is good progress. It's not enough progress. I think what the president did today was to provide a soundbite in obviously a much larger context that can be isolated to say, I think the private sector is doing just fine. Now, he did say it more than once in the press conference. Obviously, you're seeing Governor Romney pounce on that and interpret it to mean that the president thinks there's nothing wrong with the economy, which the White House would normally say is ridiculous. So there's going to be a lot of interpretation of this and a lot of actually looking at the numbers to see how fine the private sector is.
Richard, we had Chip Saltzman on. He worked with the Huckabee campaign. He's a Republican strategist. Before the end of my interview, he too reiterated the president, in his words, being out of touch regarding this private sector remark. So it's not just Governor Romney, it's Republican strategists and anyone perhaps with an R near their name here. So let me get your thoughts on the president's private sector is doing fine. Is the private sector doing fine?
Well, I think the president's been taken out of context a little bit, Tamron. First, I think the only person that's out of touch is Mitt Romney, understanding that the best way to grow the economy is through the middle class, and that's what the president understands. And in the president's press conference today, he talked about how the private sector is adding jobs, and the private sector is doing fine compared to the public sector, where all the job losses are happening, what we saw in last week Friday's report. At the end of the day, the president's saying that we need to continue employing firefighters, teachers, nurses, and police officers, and the only way we could do that is by putting money into local governments and state governments.
And the president said the big challenges, of course, he faces, or the headwinds that he often refers to, are many of the obstacles are caused by Congress. We've heard him throughout the week pick up again the wording that Congress, for lack of a better description, obstructionist. These are ideas that if they were put into place, 1 million people would be working right now, the president said today. I mean, we're getting by the numbers, but we also need to hear from this president and from Governor Romney more specific ideas on what they can do now. It is certainly fine to say, since that's the word of the day, that Congress is standing in the way, but how long can that feed the hunger of those people who want to get back to work?
Well, I mean, you would like to say not long, and I think that's probably accurate. But unfortunately, the political system, the way it is right now, makes it tough for either side, frankly. If Governor Romney were President Romney at this moment, it's hard to say what would be getting done on his watch either politically. Congress, it's an election year. Look, election years are always tough. And at this point in election year, certainly by Labor Day in most election years, nothing ever gets done. But this Congress in particular has been deadlocked in a pretty unique way. So I think the president, look, he made this decision last August that it was time to turn the tables on Congress, to run against them, and to make the point that if he couldn't do anything, he was going to at least let the American people know from his perspective whose fault that was.
Well, and it is true, Richard, the president has stayed on the drumbeat, and when you see him at some of those rallies, people are certainly cheering when he takes on Congress in this way. But as the clock ticks here, I'm hearing from a lot of people who would describe themselves as independents, who quite honestly are challenging the president and Governor Romney to come up with more specifics and what they need to do or the direction they'd like to see this economy, and not just say, well, these are the barriers that are in front of me. And I'm hearing this criticism from both of the men.
Oh, I think you're right, Tamron. I think Ann is right as well, that this is an election year and you're going to have a Congress that doesn't do anything. But the sad part is that there's so much that Congress can do to get our economy back on the right track. The president has proposed so many bills to the House of Representatives for them to get stuff done. One bill that they can take up is reauthorizing the transportation bill and providing more funding to fund construction projects, rail projects, road projects, bridges, and all these projects will create jobs. So every $1 billion spent on transportation will create 34,000 jobs, Tamron. And that's where the president's already indicated that he's willing to fund transportation expenditures. Unfortunately, Congress continues to stand in the way of that. There's no question that the people are yearning for change, and people are tired of hearing the same old, well, Congress isn't doing anything. But the truth of the matter is the president's done everything he can by executive order. And, you know, this is not only the president's government. This is Congress's government as well, and everybody needs to get to work.
Richard, Ann, thank you both for your time. Have a great weekend. I'll see you both soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamron.
And now to